Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on how to choose the right learning management system for your membership body. My name's Alan Reed. I'm a director of Get Sappy. I'm really delighted to be running this topic today. It's one of the most frequent questions we get asked is, how do I go about choosing an LMS? Do I really need an LMS? Whoops, I've chosen the wrong LMS. These things happen a lot. I'm delighted to be helping people, we hope, with this topic so that you don't fall into any of those kind of categories of problems. I'm also delighted to welcome Sarah Gasper today. Sarah, do you mind just introducing yourself as well to the delegates?
Yep. So I'm Sarah Gasper. I'm the learning manager at BEVA, which is the British Equine Veterinary Association. I oversee all the educational content that we put out. I write some of it, a small amount of it, but yeah, manage all the content that goes onto our LMS and run our live webinars. And yeah, I'm in charge of about 40 attended courses as well.
Fantastic. Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. I'm really looking forward to your comments as we go through the content as well. All right. Well, without further ado, let's crack on. Before we get started, a little bit of webinar etiquette. Everything's recorded and we'll send it to you afterwards, so don't worry about taking notes. Please do use the chat for any questions or technical issues. We've got a Q&A section a little bit later, so drop in your questions as we go. If you find yourself faced with an LMS project or you're wondering whether to do one or not, or how to go about choosing an LMS, drop the questions in, and then Sarah and I will tackle those and maybe provide some help for you, we hope. The content for this webinar is taken from our online self-paced course, which is called Managing Technology Change Projects for Business People. We've had over 5,000 people go through the course now. The most common kind of feedback is, I so wish I'd done this before my last project. It's essentially 7 hours of learning that you can do it in your own pace, that covers everything, every stage of a project in your own organization, from how do I justify a project in the business case and work out the costs and the ROI, how do I run a vendor selection, how do I prepare for my project with my internal team, implementation, testing, change management, preparing for go live, all of those things. And it covers all of that in about 30 minutes per module. We'd invite you to take advantage of the discount. The discount code is at the bottom of many of the screens, including how to take advantage of it. Okay, so carrying on from there, a little bit about Get Savvy. We provide learning and development consultancy services, specializing in membership bodies. We focus pretty much on providing contained consultancy packages, very often with a manageable budget. With a determined point of, for instance, getting you going on your learning and development journey, making sure your LMS is working for you, and so on. We're fully independent of any technology or provider. We work across all sorts of different learning and development platforms, always with the client's interest at heart. We don't work for any technology system. So in terms of typical projects that we do, very often we're asked to do an entry-level LMS or learning and development package, which might be getting somebody going with their first learning and learning management system. So we might get going with a Moodle or a Canvas system, migrate their content onto it, integrate it into their website. And we can do all of that in a very fast and contained project, with the real focus being on your content. And then we do variations of that that are more complex or more involved and more bespoke, depending on the complexity of your needs. It tends to be very easy to justify because the costs are known and at the modest end of what some of these things can cost. And we do strategic projects, hit and run projects, where we're essentially helping you define what kind of content will be most beneficial for you, helping you define what your L&D strategy is, or helping you address particular issues within your own organization. Getting to today's agenda, what we're going to talk about, first of all, is understanding what really matters when it comes to thinking about an LMS. Do you really need one at all? And if you do, what features and factors should you be considering? Then we'll be talking about running a tendering process and key factors to make sure that that goes well for you. Some top tips around that, demonstrating what you can do in a modern LMS. And then we'll look at two case studies of projects that might relate to where you are as an organization. As I say, there's a Q&A section, so please do drop your questions in as we go through, and we can then tackle your challenges and make it as relevant as possible to you. So really, let's get going with understanding what really matters with a learning management system and whether you really need one, which is, again, as I say, one of the most common questions. Do I need something to manage a library of content? Do I need to manage something that'll just usher people into a Zoom meeting? Or do I need other things? So in terms of that, let's define what a learning management system is. What I've done is I've put the main elements in bold here. So a learning management system is essentially your web-based software application used to plan and implement and assess a specific learning process. It's distinct from something like, oh, I need to book people onto an event and then put people onto a Zoom or an in-person meeting. That's training administration, and we'll talk a little bit more about the difference later. The LMS is where you're tending to, as it says in the middle box here, create your content within an LMS. A lot of LMSs have authoring systems, although that's not strictly necessary in all LMSs, but it's a common feature. It's always used to deliver the content. So that to manage people's access to the content and then deliver it to them, usually allowing them to interact with the content unless it's very basic. Then, of course, monitor the participation, monitor progress, and then assess their performance. And quite often there's a pass and fail element, which is distinct from events management or training management, because you can't typically fail an event, you can't typically fail a training session. But if your content does lend itself to people passing or failing, then you are definitely in LMS territory. Also, very commonly within an LMS, it allows your tutors, your instructors, to efficiently manage the process once people are consuming your content. So managing things like the registration process, access to different types of content, what's sometimes called student life, managing conversations. Have you done this assignment? Here's a clarification on this. Those are very often managed within LMSs, not within training management systems. And then things like quizzes, assessments, certifications, all of those elements are distinct within LMSs. If you need multiples of those elements, then you're typically into learning management territory. So then the questions we often get asked is, do I need an LMS or just an events and training management system? So we've talked about what an LMS does, and it's primarily an engine for delivering learning content. Some of it can be self-paced, very often it is. Some of it can be interactive. If your learning content in its entirety is a library of PDFs or PowerPoint slides or videos, you're not then interacting with it. You may or may not need an LMS at that point. Further questions would be asked. The training management system is essentially admin. As we're all familiar with those, you can't really be a membership body without running events of some kind. So essentially, this is about managing the funnel, if you like, of people wanting to attend something, making it easy for them to see what the thing is and allowing them to book and then manage their registration, their process of making sure they do attend, surveying them after they attend, all of those kind of factors. So essentially, if you're doing that level of admin, very important, can be very complex. We do entire projects around events and training management, but that's very distinct from managing the content itself in an LMS. So what we tend to ask people when it comes to do you need an LMS versus a training and an events management system is, what questions here can you answer yes or no to? We'll send this out afterwards, so you'll have it as an asset. But if you're mainly saying no to the questions at the top, if you're then you're really it's essentially a training management system where you need. If you're answering yes to the ones in green, then you're strictly into LMS territory. Training management systems will not do the things typically that are managed in green. With the amber, maybe we do projects where people do have a complex library of content that they want to manage access to, and that becomes a maybe for an LMS, depending on the complexity of your rules. So then what it really comes down to is finding that balance between the features you need, the scalability, and the cost. I put that element in brackets here. Remember, most people don't understand this point, and I'm not, it's just because you haven't, in the main, many people haven't done many LMS projects. It's worth recognizing that 99% of LMS projects for all of the LMS providers out there are not done for membership bodies, are not done for associations. So LMSs natively are not terribly good at what membership bodies require. So when it comes to looking at your provider and your system, etc., it's worth bearing that in mind, that you are an outlier, and that's why you have to check certain things more thoroughly than if you were a university, which is where the majority of LMS projects are, or a commercial organization using an LMS to manage compliance and training their new staff. That's where the 99% of LMS projects are. The 1% is in membership bodies. So there's a pretty good chance that your LMS provider hasn't got a great deal of experience with membership bodies. So therefore, it's worth, when you're looking at this, to look at your particular features that you need, things that differentiate you. Very often they're around things like CPD management, linking to membership value and the kind of benefits you get from different layers of membership that might be reflected in your LMS. Looking at things like integrations being more complicated for a membership body than they are for a university. All of those things can make the difference between projects succeeding or failing. Making sure that your solution is scalable, mostly in terms of the cost. Awful lot of LMS systems, unfortunately, charge you vastly more for hosting and provision when you get to higher numbers. We're going to talk about that a bit more. And the cost considerations are something that's quite hard to get transparency on in LMS projects. So when it comes to realistic LMS project budgets, when you are trying to justify a project before you're running your vendor selection, one of the most common complaints we get from the sector is that there is a genuine lack of transparency when it comes to providers. It's easy to get costs for how much it's going to cost to run your project and get it up and running and get you to year one. Much harder to get ongoing costs and clarity around that. So what we find is that it's very hard to understand what your costing options are. Very opaque, very mysterious. It's very hard for you as someone who's considering an LMS project, typically, to justify the return on investment, to make the case for the investment in this. Most courses are not going to be sold. You're not going to monetize most courses. So you're having to make the case, we're going to spend money on this system. We're not selling the courses, but the case to be made is that it's going to add value to membership. It's going to encourage recruitment. It's going to encourage retention. And there are very good and valid cases to be made around that, but it is a particular challenge. And then the factor of hidden costs, particularly year-on-year costs. We've seen a number of organizations actually stop their LMS project because the year-on-year costs were such a surprise after they'd gone live. So the top tips we suggest when you are considering your project and the way forward on that is to set a clear budget from the start, defining what you can afford, what you can justify. Be very, very mindful of your year-on-year costs and your scalability costs as your numbers go up, and how your LMS providers charge for different scenarios. And then demanding detailed multi-year pricing for different scales of users, different scales of course numbers, different scales of staff numbers. All of those things are the things that make the biggest difference. What I would say on all of that is really just demanding that clarity. Sarah, do you mind if I just invite you in here, if that's okay? I know Beaver a few years ago went through a process of adding. You've been doing training and providing training in all sorts of ways for many, many years, but you added an LMS to your training provision some years ago. So could you
Yeah.
talk about some of the decision factors that you went through and what you've realized since putting an LMS in place, please?
So I should probably stick the caveat out there that I'm actually by qualification an equine vet. I'm not a techie. And computers and I are not natural partners and mates. I am our membership's target audience rather than an IT whiz.
Great, great.
Um, so I was asked at the time that we set it up, I didn't work for Beaver, I worked for Liverpool University, and I was running content creating on some of their postgraduate online modules. So I had some experience with setting up content for online courses and course creation, but very little at choosing an LMS. So I
Yeah.
did a lot of looking into it, and I would fully agree that there's a lot of variety out there, and budgets are really important. So I didn't take the final decision on the project that we have.
Yes.
It is brilliant, and it does everything um, that we need it to do. It also does a whole host more um, that we don't use it for because you made the point that 99% of LMSs are not designed for membership organizations, or in fact, none of them are. but
Yes.
but 99% of users that doesn't matter for because they're universities, and we have definitely found that to be the case. So we use parts of our LMS a lot. We use quizzes, we use things like that a lot. We don't use any of the forums particularly because our members have to go through our website to get into it, and there's log-on issues. And it's just not very slick. And we're trying to use an app for that instead. There is an app for our LMS, but we can't use it because there's a single sign-on issue. And the way that we put the content on the app means that it doesn't work very well. So the app that we should be able to use and we pay for, we can't use because it doesn't
Yes.
work. Um, and the costs have increased. So we had a set budget to start with, as everyone will, because you're a membership organization. You don't, overspending's not really okay. So but our LMS costs have gone up. They've actually doubled since we've been running it, which I think is about 6 years. Um, and we are now tied in to upgrading every year. That's become a compulsory part of
Mm.
the package. And as far as I'm aware, there's no free training with the upgrade. So when they change stuff, you either have to spend a long time going through their online support, or you have to pay for training to be able to carry on doing what you're already doing, which yeah, you can tell I'm not an IT person. It drives me slightly
Sure,
nuts.
sure, sure. No, and that's one of the most common kind of areas of questions that people have is about the surprises around the ongoing costs with these solutions. So we'll talk about that a little more. So great, thank you very much, Sarah. And could I ask people to have remember to put your own questions in the chat, and we'll tackle those as we go. Great, thanks so much for that. So then let's talk about the supplier selection process. What I'd like to cover off with that is first of all, one of the most common questions is, well, why would I choose either an open source one? I'm using the word free here. And I should put it in brackets, open source ones like Moodle or Canvas, versus chargeable LMS options. So there are free open source LMS options. So we, for our own course platform, for instance, whether we have 100 people on it or 10,000 people on it, it doesn't cost us a penny extra. There are ways of doing that, and of course, making sure that you're not constantly surprised by those charges. So realistically, with the open source LMSs like Moodle, like Canvas, you can do pretty much everything a membership body needs to do, and you won't be the first people to have done it. You won't be pioneering it. It's definitely always worth consideration. With the chargeable or licensed or proprietary learning management systems, they are slicker in their presentation. They can be smoother when it comes to how your staff manage content and access through the LMS. The question is often asked is, well, but is that worth the tens of thousands of pounds extra per year? And wouldn't I rather spend the tens of thousands of pounds extra on content, or to Sarah's point, a little bit more training? So, they're valid options, but it will then tend to come down to your budget. So choosing the right model, one of the first things is making sure that you do understand what they're charging for. I have a real criticism of LMS providers in their lack of transparency. Some charge for things like active users, which could mean if someone is ever registered to use a course, you're still paying for them in years 2 and 3, after they've left membership, for instance. So some of that can be awful. Some of them charge on potential users. We'll scale it to the size of your membership, and some will charge on some combination of staff members and how many courses you have. So it's really difficult to do apples and apples comparisons, but it's also difficult to get transparency around that. In terms then of open source systems like Moodle, like Canvas, Camilo, OpenEdX. So the pros of those systems, very much the price is right. Depending on your LMS partner, then realistically you shouldn't be paying more for different users using it. Even with proprietary ones, I have a real bugbear that they're charging you tens of thousands of pounds a year just to host their software. It really isn't on. So then we have those systems are extremely customizable. You can say too customizable. That kind of becomes a con. Lots and lots of community support, and then flexibility. You can host it locally. You can host it remotely, and typically pretty much everything you need, including things like AI, for instance. The Moodle platform is doing an awful lot around AI in the last couple of years. Are there within those platforms? The cons, it's not free at all. You will always need a partner to do things for you. You will always need, extra help, consultancy. You'll need support with it. So it's not free. It's just a case of you're not paying the same for license fees, and that can make an awful lot of big difference. You will always need a support arrangement, and you will need somebody you can call and who will drop everything and help you if your site is down, for instance. So you'll still need paid support. And that point about it can be too flexible. We have had projects where we've had to go and rescue people from, monster systems, Frankenstein systems that were created years ago and just needed rationalization and streamlining. So it's possible to be a little bit too crazy with those systems. With the chargeable or licensed learning management systems, it's kind of the converse of all of those things. You can have a much slicker implementation model and staff experience model. The end user model will be the same, by the way, whether it's an open source or chargeable one. You can do every bit as nice on Moodle as you can on the chargeable ones. But the implementation project and the staff experience of managing content is slicker typically with the chargeable ones. Partly you have to work out, is that worth the difference in the cost. There tends to be better training documentation provided, although to Sarah's point, Beaver are using a chargeable LMS, and the training is still charged extra. And then there'll tend to be a bigger suite of built-in features that are there right away. And you can expect that it's going to be looked after by a company for a living, so it should be more reliable. The main difficulty with licensed proprietary LMSs is that there's less money for you to spend on content. And that's, I guess, my main problem. All of the research in the membership world shows that what members value more than anything else, more than how it's presented, navigation, all of those things, they value course content the most. So anything that stops you spending money on your course content is a problem. So if you can afford lots of money on your course content and lots of money on a slick LMS environment, then great for you, and then there's no compromise. Most organizations are not in that position, so realistically you're choosing between what you can spend on courses and content and delivery of the best kind of learning content versus the hosting system that is used to present that content. And those are the decisions we encourage people to consider. So then, when it comes to the supplier selection process out there, there are easily over 100 learning management systems available on the market, which means it's a minefield. How do you choose the right one? And they all insist that theirs is the best, of course. So the key factors are about recognizing that membership bodies are different. If you're a university, your LMS will have very few integration needs. If you're a private company, giving onboarding staff, your LMS is probably on its own site and not integrated to anything. However, for a membership organization, your project is going to be successful or unsuccessful based on the degree of integration into your membership management system, your CPD system, your website. All of those things are vital to having it work at all. So making sure that your provider has a huge amount of experience with that, we find to be absolutely vital. Then shortlisting providers, we find making sure that those providers have really good projects that are exactly like yours, not just a bit like yours, but really, really like yours in terms of both the content, the degree of integration, the user journeys. Do they have rules like this grade of member gets this access to a course? If you pass this course, it can then reflect back into your membership. All of those things are things that most providers have not done before, and you don't want them pioneering it in your project if you can possibly help with it. Supplier comparisons are very difficult on pricing, as we've said. They're very difficult on their models for how much they charge for hosting different volumes of courses. But nonetheless, apples and apples and comparisons are extremely difficult. As part of the course technology change projects with business people, we provide lots of templates that allow you to do comparison matrices and to provide decision support around that, because we know it's a difficult area. So the solution marketplace is really challenging. So we'll send this to you. I won't go through every point on here, but essentially, because there are so many solutions, everyone uses different language. So you think they're selling the same thing. They're not, just because they're using the same terms. It's really difficult to do that. We run something like 10 vendor selections a year in the learning management space. And a lot of it, we have to translate what the vendors are saying and making sure that they're clear on what's being provided for free and what's a chargeable extra. And then we have this whole model where it's all about comparing track record, what they've done before, their experience of your particular project, as well as that kind of transparency. So I'll just put some top tips on. And Sarah, if you don't mind, I'm just going to invite you back in. When it comes to running your selection process to choose your partner, we're very much about the software is only 50% of it. The other 50% is the organization that you get with the software, if you like a toy in a bowl of cornflakes. You really need both to be ideal for you and to have a track record in your kind of project. So we go through a whole process of making sure that people are really clear what they value in an LMS, not just hosting content, not just ushering people into a webinar and so on. We do a lot of show us, don't tell us. We find that to be really important in clearing up misunderstandings. Can you, for instance, here is some of our course content. Can you host it and show us what it would look like? And a lot of them will do that without charging, actually, because they want your business. And then the referenceability, asking to talk to existing clients and saying, what was it like when it went wrong? What was the problem? And then the focus on track record. We're running a vendor selection at the moment where one of the potential providers is saying this project is going to take 6 months to 9 months to put in, and another provider is saying it's going to take 10 weeks. Now, what that means is those two providers have completely different views of what this project is going to be about. And you have to work out, have we misinformed them, or are they just making a whole bunch of assumptions about this? So making sure that they've done your kind of project before, and that they understand what they're getting into will avoid all of those disputes and arguments later to a significant degree. So Sarah, could I just invite you in to talk about the selection process and the differences between, how people might go about trying to find organizations to include and to evaluate them. Do you have any kind of tips from your point of view and your own experience?
Don't know about tips. I've got pit hole bear trap
Mm,
warnings, but I
even
don't know
better,
about
even
positive
better.
tips. So for me, I think the key things are understanding yourself. It sounds quite corny, but knowing actually what you want to get out of it allows you to be much clearer with people that you're going to as to whether or not that's it matches, whether you align. Um, we we picked one system. Part of the reason we picked our system was because of the support. The support seemed to be able to be very tailored to us, and it was in the first instance. Um, Sadly, that company then got bought out, and then they got bought out again, and the staff changed. And we're a very small organization in a company that with a support company that works with a lot of big organizations, and I don't know if they do any other membership organizations. So
Oh, really? Yes.
we're yeah, I don't know who the rest of their customer base is now because they've been bought out twice. So I but I know that our level of support has dropped off, and the very good individuals that understood the way that we worked, that we set the system up with, and understood how we differed as a membership association to a university, now don't work for the company. So that sort of insider background knowledge that we could tap into, um, and that got us the results or the workarounds that we needed, is now not there. So we find that we are now more and more given the standard line of how to approach something without the background knowledge that actually our platform doesn't work like that, because fundamentally in the background we've got different boxes ticked. And we don't want to untick those boxes because we tick them for this reason. And then they need to go away as their advice center and try and figure out what workaround they can do that will actually work for us as who we are. So we've lost that connection that we had with our support
Yes.
company. And everybody needs to get on with their lives. People need to move and change jobs. That's no critique of the companies or anything else. It's just real life. And it's not something that I think you can plan for unless you have a 5-year contract or something like that.
Yes, and it is a really one of the things that I think is a genuine criticism of the LMS provider market is that unlike most people on this webinar will have been through CRM projects, been exposed to putting in your membership system in some way, and putting in your website project, and they're often, we do a lot of those projects too, and they're often done at the same time, and so on. And with those projects, it's a mature marketplace for the membership world, and those providers know that it's an ongoing relationship, and that they value being able to sell you new things, and that they expect to hold your hand all of the way through the project, and have a multi-year ongoing relationship with you. LMS providers often don't start from that position. A lot of LMS providers will start from the position of, we're going to stand up your LMS for you. We're basically get it up and running on the cloud-based platform. We'll migrate your content onto it, and then we just charge you a license fee every year. There is, of course, support for if it breaks, but
Yeah.
that's kind of the end of the relationship.
Yeah.
And that one of the providers that I mentioned, who thinks the project can be done in 10 weeks, they're right if that's the project. That it's just essentially standing up a more or less standalone LMS and putting some content onto it. And maybe the most bare bones integration into a single sign-on the website, not what I would call proper integration at all. If that's what they're thinking, then 10 weeks is enough to do that. But if you're thinking, no, this really needs to be an integrated, when my member goes to their landing page, I want to see content from the LMS on their landing page, as well as events and news and what do you want to do today with your CPD. And those are very, very different projects. And of course, those things will change year on year as well. No, so I completely recognize the problem that essentially it's all about the license fee after the first year.
Yeah.
And many organizations get relatively little for it once that's happened. Great, thank you so much. All right, so what I'd like to then move on to is a quick presentation of a course that's been done that is on our learning platform, and it's been done purely on an open source platform. So this one has been done on Moodle, and it's just to illustrate the point that everything that you can do on a chargeable a licensed LMS, you can also do on Moodle. You can also do on Canvas. These conversations used to happen with things like, for instance, the difference between a WordPress content management system for your website versus the most expensive one, which is, say, Sitecore as a content management system. And people used to spend, tens or even 50, £100,000 a year on the content management system, and then have realized in later years that what you do on your website is very little to do with the difference between WordPress and Sitecore, and all to do with how the content is designed, how the navigation is designed, how the branding is designed. And you can do all of those things just as well on Umbraco and Sitecore and Umbraco and WordPress and the other free solutions. So it's a case of where you choose to spend your money. So if I jump into our Moodle learning platform and a course, so let me just jump in here through our website. I'll sign in. I'll just go through the sign in process. And off we go. This takes me to my personal dashboard of what courses I've got on the go at the moment. I've got managing technology change projects for business people. I will say, yep, I want to go into there. Here's my list of modules. I've finished everything already, so I can jump into any at random. The way we set it up is that you must do them in order, but once you've done them all, you can jump around in any order. So this covers everything from the business case, planning, vendor selection, and so on, testing, implementation. Everything is typically about a 30, 40-minute module, and it's all self-paced, AI-driven, etc. So if I jump into supplier selection, for instance, then what I get is the navigation on the left. You can see that it's forcing me to do it in a particular order. Once I've done a particular thing, the padlock goes away and I can jump back and forth in any order that I want. So I'll say, all right, we'll go through choosing the supplier. We've set it up so it's AI-driven avatars who talk to you all of the way through and introduce themselves and give you the content. So they're guiding you through the content on the way through. This has given me an overview of what my own project would look like, from benefits management, the business case, essentially requirements gathering, how to do testing and UAT, etc. So then from there, I want to be able to go through and essentially carry on through the supplier selection module. Take me through learning outcomes. For every module, there's always going to be learning outcomes. And then this is my guidance for the course, for this module. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, you're the project manager. You have to coordinate these. You have to deal with these stakeholders. I can talk to the stakeholders by clicking, and they'll tell me what they want out of this project. The finance director wants this. The operations director wants that. Every module, we always provide everyone with a load of downloadable assets that they can then take away and run on your own project. So here's a supplier scorecard. Here's how you compare suppliers. Here's a document that you should fill in when you're getting a reference from somebody, and so on and so on. So then, as we're delivering the content, the avatar is always presenting the content to you and describing the things verbally. Our research showed that that was the best way of getting content across to people, to have it explained in human language, as well as then allowing there's actually a conversation in different parts of it where there's a scenario. So let's say you're running a selection process, and this scenario says all of the providers have done their stuff, but your staff are locked in and can't agree on a way forward. So these different avatars will give their ideas of what would unblock that and what different things that you could try. We do an awful lot of check your understandings of all of the way through. So just making sure people are awake when they're taking your content. It can't be just like a video. So if I do question 1 on here, I then can say, yep, I think that's true, and that's true. I'll submit that. Whoops, it's wrong. And then it'll tell me why it's wrong and where I could go back to the course to continue continue with that bit of content. Likewise, question 2, I can drag and drop these elements onto here, and then submit that. Again, it tells me why it's wrong, and so on. And then from there, I finished the module. I haven't passed this module, unfortunately, but I can retake it or go back to my dashboard. And then, of course, from here, once I've finished all these modules, there's a lot of, because this is an accredited course, you get an accredited qualification at the end. Then you have to go through a proper formal assessment process. We have lots of different question types from multiple choices, yes, no, scenario-driven questions, missing word questions. And when you get to the end of that, you get your accredited qualification, which in this case is accredited by the Institute of Leadership and the International Association for Project Managers, and CPD UK. We always have a verification link on there, so it's digital and it looks great on people's CVs, and great on your assessment and getting that next job. So all of that, as I say, was done on the Moodle platform. And we spent all of the money on the course content and getting the messaging across and the assessments and the checking of your understanding and all of those elements, and not on the platform itself. And when we started getting a few thousand people going through the course, if we were in the model of paying a license provider for that, we would have ended up with a lot of difficulties, because we don't want to be paying, tens of thousands a year just for someone to host our course. Essentially, we want to spend the money on more content. If I may, let me just run a quick poll before I invite Sarah back in, if I may. I can see some questions coming in on the Q&A. Thank you very much for that. So I'd like to ask people, if I may, just so we can make sure we're as relevant as possible, about your own position in relation to LMS and your and learning and development in your own organization. There are 3 questions on here, please, if you could just fill those in. Are you considering a new LMS? Is that where you are? Are you considering it for your members and other external stakeholders? Some membership bodies have it only for their staff, to make sure that people are complying with policies, and so on. And then the second question is, what's your condition, your current position in relation to your own? You've got one and it's working well. You've got one but it's not working well. You're considering getting one in future. So just what your position is in there, and then your position in terms of L&D for your members. One of the most common positions people have is that you've got great content, but no bugger is using it because they can't find it, or it's not being served up to them properly. So if that's your position, there's a response for you there. So I'll just give it a few more seconds, please, and then just as the answers are coming in, and then I'll just end the poll and share the results with people. So what we're seeing is that 80% of people on this course, I guess it's a kind of self-selecting audience, are considering an LMS for their members and other external stakeholders, with 20% for their staff. Very different challenges in doing that, but an LMS can be vital for both. The most common current position is people considering one in the future, and then it's followed closely by we've got one, but we're not getting the most out of it. That chimes with our research as well. And then I'm delighted to see that for 40% of the delegates, you've got a great learning and development offering and it's working well. Less delighted to see that the other 60%, you've got great content, but it's not being delivered very well with your technology, and a need to improve both the learning and development content and the technology to deliver it to members. One of the most disappointing things that we see with people when they do struggle to have the content delivered properly to members is that there's no money left over for content. You've spent all the money on the technology and the project, and actually we end up with organizations saying, we don't have the budget to develop these courses. We're still delivering them on Zoom. We'd love to digitize them, but that's going to cost more money than we can afford because we're spending too much on the platform. Okay, so just carrying on from there, I'd just like to talk about a couple of case studies, and then I'm just going to invite Sarah to comment again, if I may, Sarah, just to remind you, or just to warn you. So here's one case study with the Royal Town Planning Institute. This is a project. Actually, we're just finishing this up now. Essentially, they have a huge L&D offering for 27,000 members. They run it across different regions in the UK, top flight content, and so on. The great majority of it until recently was delivered in person and through Zoom post COVID. And then it's a huge part of their membership offering. The challenge was that their LMS and their relationship with their provider had become stale. System they didn't trust that they could embark on expensive projects without being let down continually, and they ended up with a very poorly integrated system, very common. That they have to pretend it's integrated by doing lots of work at the back office. So what we've done with the RTPI is essentially work to understand what your real goals and ambitions are, how it should tie into membership, how it should tie into your organizational goals. That could be done incredibly quickly. Work through requirements gathering and vendor selection process, and then helping compare apples with apples across. Actually, they're considering proprietary and open source platforms, and why you would spend money on one, and is it worth it on the other. And then a kind of negotiation of how to get the best pricing out of those organizations, and saying, look, that's just trying it on. No, we're not going to pay for that. And there is surprisingly a lot of movement when you do poke back. Quite a lot of making sure that people are on board and understand the differences, and that's where a lot of the time and talking goes on. This is a second case study with an organization, you'll see why in a minute, prefers not to be named. So this association has and had a huge wealth of specialized content, white papers, reports, research, surveys, as well as training courses and provision. So they had 30 in-person courses. They decided that they needed an LMS, and deployed one in 2022. Their problems with it then were they didn't understand the degree of the resources required to migrate their in-person courses into a digital format. And then to manage the whole process of presenting it to users, managing users' access to it. They did not understand, and this is a direct quote, the fantastically high annual costs with relatively little traffic coming to the site, because they didn't have money to spend on marketing and other elements of it. So the starting position was that they were considering whether to write off the whole LMS project as a poor use of their resources and spend the money back on in-person and Zoom training. However, they have lots of remote members all over the world, and those people were demanding to be able to do things in outside of hours and around the clock that would not work in-person or Zoom training. So we worked with them to understand what they were trying to do, understand audience needs, etc., what they really needed out of an LMS. And what we recommended was that they focus on those core LMS requirements, not the twiddly bits that they didn't actually use, going to Sarah's point. And then what we did is we stood up a low-cost platform for them. And in their case, it was Moodle. And then all the add-ons that make it very slick and easy to use, and then migrated their content on and did the integration with them. And that essentially cost them 1 year of the fees that they were paying on the other LMS to do that. And then after that 1 year, their money is then available to spend on the content. So in business terms, they doubled their spending in 1 year to rather than abandoning the project. They put up we put up a parallel LMS. Did all of the migration, integration, all of the services, but that only cost 1 year of what they were paying, essentially for very poor value on license fees. And then after that, it's all benefits. It's all things that they can then spend their money on their content. Sarah, if I could just get your comments first of all before we go to the Q&A questions. Could I just get your thoughts on the two case studies, for instance, difficulty in selection, and the need in some cases to decide, oh, do I write this off and not have my LMS anymore because it's so expensive, versus doing something cheaper. Do you talk to a lot of membership organizations and colleagues? Do you recognize those scenarios? Have you come across any of those scenarios?
Yeah, so we are I definitely have sympathy for the unnamed company. I think it's really
Nobody
easy.
wants to name themselves when they've had a real
No,
disaster.
no. But I have a lot of sympathy for them. We run 40 on attended courses, and having looked at trying to run some of that online through our fortunately already set up LMS, um, through COVID, I have a full appreciation of the amount of work and effort it takes to move a attended course into an online format. It's epic. Um, it's not
Yes,
undoable, and it's not necessarily a bad idea, but it is an epic amount of work
yes,
to make it work. Um, and the realization that actually going forwards, you're spending a lot of limited membership money on licensing and trying to get that product to your membership base, who in our case are ambulatory vets, mostly out on the
yes,
road. They don't sit at desks, and they're not computer people. So trying to get that content to them, um, is really hard. And we want to gamify it. We're looking now at how we try and grow our online content, because it was brilliant during COVID because we were slightly ahead of the curve.
yes,
We're now about average, I would say. And what I don't want to do is sit still and end up being below average and looking old and dated. And in this world, with the amount of AI and new technology that's coming along all the time, that's available on your phone, um, it's really hard, I think, to stay looking slick and smart and keep up with that member
absolutely.
experience that people want and are paying for ultimately.
Yes,
Um, and our LMS costs have gone up. We're approaching the end our next limit of numbers. So if we go over our next membership level, or we go into the next pay band, which is significantly more expensive. So although we want to grow our membership, we're quite scared of growing the membership
and
because
that's
it's going to
awful.
become
It should not
phenomenally
be.
expensive. I
It,
know.
it's nothing to do with your LMS, how big your membership is. It's
No.
literally, so it just does feel like a rip-off. I'm sorry to rant, because it doesn't cost the provider a penny more when your membership numbers increase. It really doesn't. They don't go off and buy new server capacity. So I understand everyone's got to pay for their software development and pay for their support arrangement, but this really does feel
Mm.
this does feel exploitative. No, great. Thank you very much for those points. And we've had some great points come
Yeah.
in
Questions come in. Yeah.
through the Q&A. So Anonymous has asked, you previously mentioned that Moodle Canvas is open license free, but support would be needed. Is there support for the setup or ongoing support for the use of the system? Either option, do you have a list of organizations that offer this support? So yes, and I can. I'm really delighted to engage with those conversations after the webinar. We're independent, so we don't recommend people, but I can provide lists of organizations without a recommendation. Absolutely. So Moodle, nothing is free. We're a sophisticated audience. We all understand that. What the difference is, as Sarah was saying, this kind of grasping license fee is what you can avoid. You will always have to pay for someone to work with you to set the platform up and get it working. But that's good. Nobody minds paying for time. Nobody minds paying for resource. And guidance and all of the kind of help. So that's fine. It's just when you're handing over money for essentially hosting your content, and that can run into tens of thousands of pounds a year. In fact, it always seems to go well over £10,000 a year, and sometimes into £50,000 a year, and so on. And it creeps up all of the time. So not free for getting the platform up and running, and not free for the support. But you shouldn't be paying these extortionate license fees unless you've got a really good case with functionality that you can't do without. And I don't come across that very often at all. So we would always recommend that you work with an open source partner that specializes in membership and that system. And like we do, but I would, all I would say is it has to have those criteria. We do it, but also others do it, but they must specialize in membership. They must specialize in open source, and then they won't charge you a license fee for, depending on your number of members. And that means that those tens of thousands of pounds are available for you to spend on your course content. Then that takes us to the next question. Segue neatly, like a radio DJ. So Bruce has asked, when you say you spend money on content, who designed that for you? What internal expense did you engage a supplier? If so, why? And then Bruce carries on with that question. Um, was it what sort of content required expenditure? So the way that content creation works is that you can do an awful lot in-house. You might spend money on some really good authoring tools, like say Articulate 360 will cost around £1,500 a year for someone to create, to make it as easy as possible for someone to create really good content. But there's an awful lot that you can do in-house. And for an awful lot of organizations, they can create good content in-house without having to go to external suppliers. Where you start getting more sophisticated and complex content, you might then start buying in help. But people don't tend to mind buying time, as I say, and I don't mind buying time. So if you're buying consultancy help to help you shape and design the content that you want, to bring things like in video, gamification, scenario-driven content that's a bit more complicated, the first time they do it for you, you can get them to show you how to do it or to do it as a project, whatever model suits you. But more sophisticated content, there's good value in getting help for doing that. But it's purely a choice and purely driven by what kind of content that you have. Sarah, I know you're responsible for the content, and you've made some really valid content about how much
Yeah.
time it consumes. But could I just get your thoughts as well on when you might get help? Imagine you did have the money, when you might get help for content, and when you might choose to do it in-house?
So I'm a vet. We have a council that are also made of vets. And we will get people to give us ideas of content. We get ideas from our membership because then I know it's what they want to learn about, and I know that they're already engaged. Um, and then I will ask other members, overseas vets, world experts. That's a wonderful thing about online stuff, is that you can ask the best person in the world to talk to you for half an hour on something that is incredibly important to other equine vets, and they wouldn't have that opportunity otherwise. So we have a lot of love in our membership for our free member benefit online webinars, because we literally ask the best people in the world to discuss what the hot topics are at the time. So that I love. We do pay those people. We don't pay them a
Yes,
lot because we're a membership fee. So in that way, we do outsource that. If we're talking about quizzes and stuff, I will write those myself. I can access the relevant papers, etc., to make sure they're up to date and that my
great.
feedback is on point. Um, so we use a mixture. We are One of the areas I would love to go into is um, making animations. So insurance, equine insurance, it is the most boring thing in the world. And I would love to make it more interesting because it's really, really important for our vet membership and our new grads in particular to understand all the nuances of insurance when it relates to the horse that they're treating and the owners. But it is the most dull topic to try and make interesting, even chatting through it and
Yes,
doing case scenarios. So I would love to be able to go out to a completely external company and say, right, can I work with you to make an animation to make insurance look cool,
that's a
if
great
possible?
example. That's a great example. Yeah.
Another one is use of drugs on the cascade, a very veterinary specific but essential thing that is full of legality, but is tediously boring. So it's those niche things where I don't have the skill set to work with the AI to develop something that is impactful, really short acting, because increasingly people use YouTube to watch stuff and learn stuff. So
Yes.
people's attention span is now about 2 or 3 minutes. Um, so it's trying to get those nuggets across. And that's where I would like to spend the
I couldn't
big
agree
money.
more. I couldn't agree more. And so imagine, we posed the question. Imagine you took these tens of thousands a year or thousands a year you're paying on licensing and were able to use that on content. What could
Love
you
it.
do? And people go, oh, that would be amazing. And of course, if once you paid for specialist content, um, then it's yours forever. you're not paying a license fee on it. You've got this great animated thing, and you can insert it into other courses, etc. It's yours forever. So nobody minds paying for that. So I think you can always make a really good case for saying, here is a whole library of content we've got to create. Here is the resource we have internally. Here's what is simple. It's just a PowerPoint or it's a white paper that someone's written. I could chop that up myself and put it on. Here is something that's fantastically dull, and I'd love it if it sang and danced. And I'm going to use either an AI-driven tool for that, or I'm going to get an agency to give me some animation and to break it out and to do it. And I need some help designing it. I don't want to just take a PDF and chop it up into pages with a back and forth button on it. I want to do something more sophisticated. And people don't mind paying for that kind of thing, I find. The key thing is that you have the choice. If you've got the budget available because you're not paying it for license fees, then you've got the choice to get a little bit of help where you need it and get the best representation for your content. Great. I'm just conscious of the time. Thank you so much for those fantastic questions. So then what I'd like to then remind people of is that we're very happy to talk to you about your own projects. We have really fixed cost models that keep the prices low. And that could be for a repair project or a new project, or just stopping people from paying outrageous license fees that they shouldn't really have to. And then I'd like to just thank everyone for attending and remind everyone we're going to be providing the content and presentation to you. Please do. If you're getting involved in a project, do yourself a favor and take advantage of the discount offer on the course so that you don't get shouted at and fired in the middle of your project. And then also we're always happy to have a talk about your project. We do give a lot of free pointers as well. Sometimes it comes back a year later in a project. We're always very happy to do it. And then please do come and use the rest of the program still going on. So we have a specialist session on AI coming up. And then what really matters and how a membership body LMS project is different from a standard one, and the factors that you really need to home in on when you're talking to your providers. So with that, I just want to say thank you again for Sarah for your fantastic tips and insights and real world experience. It's been a real pleasure having you on. Thank you very much for everyone for attending, and really look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.